Hello and welcome to the fourth caregiver webinar in our series. Today's topic is strategies for successful support. My name is Rachel White and I'm a board certified behavior analyst at the Center for Human Development at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. So today's topic about strategies for successful support, we're really going to go over some general strategies, some general ideas, techniques, things that can be helpful to address a variety of skills that you are trying to increase, or perhaps to reduce the likelihood of encountering overly adapted behaviors that you would like to decrease or avoid. So the theme of the topic is basically what are some additional tools to put into your tool belt to use when you are supporting someone and you're struggling maybe with a particular activity, concept, skill, or behavior. So one of the first places to start would be what we call antecedent strategies, right? What can we do to make the environment more conducive to learning, more conducive to whatever activity we are trying to accomplish? And one good way to help learners of all ages and abilities is to create some predictable routines. So even if we ourselves don't tend to have a lot of predictability and we tend to be more of the go with the flow type, predictable routines can really help support learners who are still gaining skills in an area, learning a new skill, or may not be as able to adapt as quickly. So learning can occur more easily with repetition. So if you are setting up predictable routines, then the learner is going to be more readily available to know what's coming up next and therefore be anticipating and ready to learn at those times. Overly applied or overly adapted behaviors are less likely to occur if the learner knows what to expect next. If they know what is coming up in their routine, if they know whether it's a school day or a work day or a fun day, then they are less likely to act out or have a meltdown because it's predictable and they know what's coming up. We're also, as supporters, more likely to be prepared to create those teaching moments if we know what activities we're going to be doing next. So if we anticipate the activity and we have a routine and we know what we're going to be doing next, then we are in a better position to provide the supports and teaching moments that our learner may need in those moments as we get to them. We can also then provide more support to the sections of the routines where we know that our learner needs more support. If we know that they struggle with a certain transition or certain activity or even certain times of the day, we can, with a predictable routine, we can prepare and have more supports available for them during those times. We can think about when we're going to need maybe additional people to help support us because we know that these certain times or activities are going to require more support for our learner. And we can have the materials and things that we need ready because we know what's coming up. So predictable routines is a good starting point to help make everything else flow smoother. Another strategy that can be very helpful is a task analysis. And this is basically breaking down complex tasks into smaller steps. Sometimes when we are giving instructions or we are trying to help our learner with a task or an activity, we might think, oh, well, it's a one-step instruction, or this is really simple. Just go make yourself a sandwich. Just go do the dishes. Just go get ready for bed. Brush your teeth. Those types of things we may give them as a one-step instruction, or we may say them as if they are, one thing. But if we look at it, they're really a series of smaller steps. So brushing teeth, it's not like clapping your hands where you just do it and it's done. Brushing your teeth requires you to get your toothbrush, get the toothpaste, put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, put the toothbrush in your mouth in various sections and using certain motions to make sure that you've done a thorough job, and then cleaning it off and cleaning out your mouth and putting things away. So a task analysis is a strategy that we can use to really sort of analyze the behavior that we are trying to help our learner with, or the skill that we're trying to teach, and break it down into smaller components. You don't necessarily have to have someone else do a task analysis for you. You can just think about the steps, kind of like if you're writing a recipe, or you are making instructions to, put together a toy or some furniture, right, that maybe came unassembled. Those are basically task analysis that we follow. So it's not even something that our learner has to memorize how to do in the future. It could be that we provide them with the written steps or picture steps that the learner can then reference from here on out, the way that I know I reference recipes. I don't have any recipes memorized. I always have to look them up, and that's okay. So you're going to write out the list of steps in the order that it is required to complete the task. You want to make sure that each of those steps is going to be sort of a small enough piece for your learner to be able to follow it, but not so tiny a piece that you're saying things perhaps that are way too detailed, right? I have never needed to use a task analysis that says, reach out with your right hand and place it on top of the handle of the water spigot and then turn it at 45 degrees or 90 degrees. Like, I've never needed to use that level of detail. I can say, turn on the water. But you do need to adjust it to the level of your learner's skill set. So again, using a recipe as an example. If I had a recipe that the first step was make a pie dough, I'm not going to be successful with that because I don't know how to make a pie dough. I need make a pie dough broken down into whatever those steps are, right? Tell me my ingredients, tell me how I combine them, tell me what I need to do to get to the pie dough stage, right? So think about your learner, think about the steps that they could be successful with, and break the skill down into that level of detail for them. You want to then, when you are practicing it, again, it could be a written list, it could be a picture sequence. It also could be that you are just going to help the learner memorize the steps without them having to necessarily have a visual component. So for example, if I am teaching a young child how to brush their teeth, I may never use like a list of the steps, but I might just say the steps to them to begin with, or I might show them because I'm brushing my teeth at the same time, Or if my learner struggles with the motor control, I might be providing some overhand assistance to help them reach or feel how that toothbrush is supposed to fit in their mouth and where it's supposed to go. When you go to perform and teach the activity, you want to always go through all of the steps in order, right? Think of it like the making a sandwich or making macaroni and cheese. You can't practice stirring cheese into the macaroni without having done all of the steps to prep the macaroni. So since you're going to do all of the steps in order to get it to the point where they can practice all the steps, you're always going to do all of the steps in order, and you're going to help them with whatever level of support they need in order to successfully perform those steps. Then, as you've practiced it a few times, so every morning I help my learner brush their teeth. Every evening I help my learner brush their teeth. Over time, they're going to start to be able to do some of those pieces of the task analysis themselves. And I am going to provide less support in those areas where they are able to start being more independent. So you're going to fade back your assistance on the steps as your learner is able to complete them. There are 3 types, so I'm going to kind of give you the terms for those in case you run across them or in case you want to use the terminology. But honestly, whatever way works best for your learner is what you want to use. So forward chaining means that if I had a 10-step task analysis that I am teaching, that I would start fading out my help with like the first step. And when they're independent with the first step, then I'd start fading out my help with the second step. But in the meantime, I'm always going to help them through the entire 10 steps. Backward chaining is the same thing, but in reverse. I'm always going to help them with every step. And then when we get to the last step, that's the one that I'm going to start letting them do independently on their own. And then when they're good with that one, I'm going to help them with all the steps. But then now the last 2 steps are the ones that they're going to be practicing and doing on their own. Total task presentation just means that whatever steps they can do, you let them do independently and you fade out any of those steps. So for example, I might have a learner who, I'll use the macaroni, right? They are real good at pouring the macaroni into the water and they're real good at stirring, but they need some help with pouring the hot water and the macaroni out into a strainer. And then they need help pouring the cheese in, but then they're real good at stirring. So we just sort of alternate and help with whatever tasks they need help with, whatever steps they need help with in the task analysis. So to summarize, the task analysis is a way to break down more complex activities and teach it in smaller components so that your learner is able to start putting all of those components together to be more fluent with the activity. When we are talking about, general support strategies, we want to think about the instructions or cues that we are giving. Sometimes we make the mistake thinking that our learner knows when they're supposed to do an activity, and they may not actually be attending to what we think that they're attending to or what we would like them to attend to. So the instruction or the cue, that's the signal to start a particular behavior. Oftentimes, it is an instruction. Hey, it's time to go brush your teeth, or it's time to come to dinner, or go wash your hands, or, do your homework. Sometimes we do have clear instructions. And so we want those instructions to be relatively short. It can adjust to the language of your learner and their ability to understand the language and the words that you're using, but we don't want to have a really long and drawn out instruction that makes us sort of lose what the instruction was, right? So for example, I could tell my learner, it's dinner time, go wash your hands. That would be pretty short and at a level that they would understand. But if I said something like, okay, well, the macaroni's almost done, and then we're gonna set the table, and then I'm gonna need you to wash your hands so that you can come over and be ready, because we don't want to have any germs on your hands when we eat. That's a lot of information, and my learner may not have caught what the point of that was, which was go wash your hands, it's almost time to eat. So verbal instructions, cues that you're giving should be short enough to be understood and to highlight what you're really trying to have the learner understand. It's best when you're teaching a new skill for those instructions to be consistent. So you're saying things the same way or very close to the same way every time so that they're learning, oh, that's what that means. Okay, when we say time to get ready for bed, that means all of these things. It doesn't mean some of those. It doesn't mean only this. This is what it means. You also want to consider generalization. So choose words or instructions that the learner is likely to encounter in their natural environment, in their day-to-day life, right? One example would be things like toileting, right? If you were working with a learner to try and teach them about using the restroom, are we calling it a bathroom or restroom or toilet? Are we saying go potty maybe for small children? Are we saying use the restroom? What type of language and words would be most easily understood and generalized or be able to use in other environments? This can sometimes happen for learners and families where you start to kind of invent your own words, your own language, or just the phrasing that you use. Oh, we call it this at home. Oh, when he says that, that's what he means. He's asking for this other thing. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if that means that everybody can get their needs met and everybody's understood, then that works. But think about starting to pair or introduce those additional words so that other people will also better understand your learner, or so that your learner can better understand instructions from other people, maybe outside of the home. And I'll just give an example. We joke around with my kid, oh, you're such a buster, you're a silly bones, you know, stuff like that. And then my kid used that, oh, I'm just being a buster. And the teacher's like, what are you talking about? It's like, okay, well, it's just, you know, a playful jokey nickname thing that we use, but I can see where that's not necessarily the same terms that other people might use. So now we don't necessarily understand each other exactly, right? So that's just an example. So think about what are the words or instructions that might be used in more environments and also teach those. Now we also talked about a cue. So not everything has to be the instruction. Sometimes what we want to start the behavior is a particular event, right? So for example, maybe for my teenager, the cue to do the dishes is that they walk past the kitchen sink and there are dirty dishes in the sink. And that's the cue that I want them to attend to then initiate their chore of taking care of the dishes. In that case, and with the instruction, we have to present the cue or the instruction, and then we need to support them to perform the behavior that we want to do. So, for example, I could say, and I could give the instruction, and I do when my kids are younger, okay, it's time to do blah, blah, blah chore. Okay, it's time to do the dishes. We'll use that as an example. You know, when they're in elementary school and they're helping with those components, I'm telling them, I'm giving the instruction, it's time to do the dishes. Come on, let's go do the dishes together. As they become a teenager, then I want them to be able to assess the situation and initiate those chores without having to be told. So, for example, when I start making that shift, I might do things like, hey, check the sink. What do you see? Oh, it looks like there's dirty dishes. Okay, what should we do with those? Oh, we should probably load the dishwasher. All right, let's do that. And then as I continue to fade back that support, I might just say something like, have you checked the kitchen? Or I might just be pointing at the dishes in the sink, and then they initiate the rest. So once you give the cue or the instruction, and you provide that support, then you want to start fading that support back so that they can start to be successful on their own. You also don't want to repeat the same instruction or cue over and over again without changing something else, right? So if I said, hey, check the kitchen, what do you see? And they're like, I don't know. I don't see anything that stands out to me. Then instead of saying, we'll check it again or check the kitchen, right? I want to provide some additional cues, some additional support or feedback. I might say, oh, well, did you look in the sink? Right? So I'm providing some additional support, what I'm wanting them to pay attention to. Or I might come in and I might kind of scan around and I might say, well, I see this stuff in the sink, and that means we should do the dishes, right? But I'm not just going to sit there and say, we'll check again, or, do your homework, do your homework, do your homework, do your homework. Because if it didn't work the first time, it's not very likely to work the next time. I need to do something additional. I need to provide some support to help them with that task, or help them get started with that task, or figure out what the barrier is. Or I need to provide them with some feedback. I see you said you cleaned your room, but I still see dirty clothes on the floor outside of the basket. So let's try again. Finish cleaning your room, right? I've given them some feedback, so now they know what areas to focus on. All right, so when we start to teach, we are pairing that instruction or cue with some support so that they can perform the behavior. That support is called prompting. So prompting is going to be a type of a signal or support or help that currently allows them to perform the skill that we're trying to teach. And this is how we pair them. When you prompt, you are pairing that instruction or cue with support that already allows them to perform the behavior so that they are practicing the behavior in the presence of the signal or cue. Once you do that several times, then you're able to start fading out your support, and now they're able to perform the behavior just to the signal and without your assistance. And it's important that we plan for and that we start fading out our assistance as our learner becomes successful, so that they don't over rely on us. Some learners, it may only take a handful of times practicing a skill and they're going to learn it. For other learners, it may take months, potentially years for very complex skills. And so it's okay to continue to provide that support, but always in your mind have this plan for, all right, how much support do they still need versus how much am I able to start stepping back so they can be more independent. Teaching a specific skill is usually going to require a specific type of prompt. The type of prompt that you use is going to depend upon the skill that you're teaching, as well as your learner and what supports work best for them. But you do have to use that prompt, and it already has to be something that works. So, for example, if I was trying to teach my learner to follow an instruction to clap their hands, I might say, clap your hands. And my learner doesn't do anything. Okay, so they don't know what those words mean. They don't know how to do it when I ask them to. I could say, clap your hands like this, and I could demonstrate for them. However, if my learner doesn't know how to imitate, if that's not a skill that they have, then me showing them isn't going to help them be successful because they don't know how to copy. So instead, I would have to select a prompt that they are comfortable with that would help them learn what those words mean. So potentially, I might say, clap your hands, and then I take their hands and I clap their hands together. And I say, yeah, that's right. And as long as they're comfortable with physical touch, right? We're not grabbing people who don't want to be touched. So that's not what physical prompting looks like. But if they're comfortable with you helping them, then that's one way that you could do that. But I couldn't use the model prompt because they don't know how to copy me. So you have to use a level of support that works, right? It's like another example would be if I wanted to teach my learner how to brush their teeth and I wrote out all the steps, but my learner is 4 and doesn't know how to read yet. That's not going to be a helpful prompt. Instead, maybe I will say the words to them and they'll follow the steps that way. Maybe I will show them, or maybe I will help them with my hand over their hand and they can feel where it goes. Those would all be different ways to support that already work for my learner. Some other things to remember with prompting: you want the prompt to occur as close in time as possible, or the exact same time that the cue occurs. And that's so that you're pairing that cue or instruction with the behavior itself. If you have them too far apart, then it will just take longer for the learner to understand that, oh, when you say those words, you mean do this, okay? The other things are to only prompt as much as necessary. We don't need to provide more prompts than our learner needs to be able to be successful. So in my example of teaching a learner to clap their hands, if they can copy me, then I'm going to do that. There's no reason I need to put my hands on them to physically help them perform the skill if they can copy my example. I'm only going to provide as much prompt as necessary. We also have to think about what are some of the extra or unintended signals that we might be giving. If I always say, go sit down or come sit down, and I'm tapping the chair, I need to be aware that my learner might just be attending to me tapping the chair and not necessarily listening to the words. So make sure you're picking and concentrating on which cue or instruction you want your learner to attend to, and try to eliminate or minimize the others. Another example would be if I had flashcards and I was trying to teach my learner, this is an elephant and this is a giraffe, but the elephant picture has an orange border and the giraffe picture has a blue border. It's possible that my learner might be focusing on those borders instead of the pictures in the middle. So it would be better if I could have a flashcard that didn't have different colored borders, right? They all have the same border or there's no borders. Just because sometimes our learners focus on different things than what we think they should be focusing on. And so we want to try and make it simple and clear for them as to what they need to focus on. So real briefly, here are a few of the different types of prompts that you might give or use. Again, think of prompts as like the type of support. So spoken prompt means that the person is going to hear the prompt, but in order for it to be helpful, they need to understand specifically what it is that you're saying. So telling somebody to do something if they don't know what those words mean is not going to be a helpful prompt. A visual prompt means that the learner is going to see the prompt. It could be that these are like pictures that cue them as to what they need to do next. It could be that you're modeling, so you're showing them what to do. There also could be gestures like tapping the chair or signaling them to wipe their mouth, right? Those gestures that you might want to teach. Again, they would need to be able to physically see the cue or the prompt that you're giving them, and they'd need to know what that meant, right? So for modeling, they'd need to be able to copy it. For a picture, they'd need to know what that picture is supposed to represent. A physical prompt, this is where you're going to provide some physical guidance. You want to be able to help them. This might be really helpful when you're doing some fine motor or gross motor skills so that somebody gets a feel for what it feels like to perform that action. The learner has to accept physical prompting, or you have to build up to the point where they can accept physical prompting, okay? Not every learner wants to be touched. If they don't want to be touched, and you're struggling because they also don't understand some of the other prompts, then you might start gradually shaping up tolerating being touched so that somebody could help them perform things that were that they're trying to learn. But again, this is not forcing somebody to do something they don't want to do. This is just physically helping somebody. Like if a kid, you're working on handwriting and you want them to learn how to do the form of the letters, you might put your hand over theirs, help them hold the pencil and help them feel the motion for that. That's what a physical prompt is. Environmental prompts are very broad, but generally speaking, we're talking about how do we arrange the environment or the setup so that the learner is attending better to what we want them to attend to. So that might mean that we only have a few items out to start with. The prompt is, if I tell you to find the elephant, there's only 3 cards on the table and it's not 20 cards, right? We start with just a smaller field. If I wanted you to touch the elephant card, I might put the elephant card closest to you. That would be a positional prompt. Or I might make the elephant card like a material or stimulus prompt. I might make the elephant card the biggest card out there. So it's the biggest picture. And then over time, what we would do with all of these is we would start to gradually move it back to whatever the environment or the end goal is. So the elephant picture that was extra big would get gradually smaller and smaller. The positional prompt where it's closest to us would move closer and closer back to the line of the other animals. And the field size prompt, we might have 3, but we slowly add 4 or 5. So again, the idea is, and these are just a sampling of some types of prompts. The idea is just that you can provide support in a lot of different ways. You can provide these prompts in a lot of different formats. And then you want to be sure that you're finding a support mechanism that works for them to practice the skill. And then you'll start fading it out over time. So fading the prompt. When we talk about prompt fading, we're talking about backing out your support. So providing less support over time with the goal being that the learner is still going to be able to perform the skill, but now they're going to be able to do it to the cue and not rely upon as much support. Now, there are going to be some skills that some of our learners may need forever, and that's okay. They may need support to do those behaviors or to perform those skills. They may need that for their life, and that's okay. This is not to say that everybody has to be independent. Instead, what we're trying to do is help our learner to be as independent as possible, so that they can have like that self-confidence, and so that they are not as reliant upon other people who may or may not always be able to meet their needs, right? So with that in mind, when we're teaching something new, we're going to provide a lot of supports, but we're going to start fading those supports out so that our learner can be more independent. There are three main types of fading strategies. One is to fade out gradually. So you just do kind of less and less of the prompt. If I was physically helping somebody, I would just, provide less pressure, provide less touch, move my hands back a little bit until they're more independent. There's mini prompts followed by no prompt. So this is the one where we've done it a whole bunch in a row, and now I'm going to set you up for it, but I'm just not going to help at all, and see if you can do it because we've just done it a lot. We've repeated it a lot. So trying to practice it that way. And then there's time delay, which is where you're going to systematically pause and wait to see if the learner jumps in and completes the task on their own. This one is a little tricky to do very systematically, but also is one of those that a lot of people tend to use when they're providing some support. So you might provide some assistance on the skill, and then the next time you present the skill, you might pause for 2 seconds and see if they know how to do it. And if not, then you're going to jump in at 2 seconds and you're going to help them do it. Then maybe the next time, or you've done it a few times where you wait, and then you're going to start fading. You're going to wait a little bit longer. And gradually you're going to increase the time delay between when the instruction or cue occurs and when you jump in with help, and the learner is going to start beating your prompt because they basically just don't want to wait on your help. They can do it themselves. It is a little tricky though, because you want to be careful that you don't accidentally teach your learner to just wait and somebody's going to do it for them or do it with them, right? So that strategy may not work the best for learners that are less motivated to perform whatever that activity is, right? But by fading these prompts, we're increasing independence, we're reducing the level of support that our learners rely on. They're starting to respond to the natural cues that are in their environment, the regular instructions or the cues that we want them to attend to. And they can then move on to more complex skills because they are fluent with some of those easier skills. So just a task analysis, a little breakdown of how prompt fading might work. You're going to choose your appropriate prompt strategy. So what do you know is a good way to support your learner with this particular skill? What's a good way to fade out this particular skill for your learner, right? Do they do well with the mini prompts followed by no prompt? Do they do better with fading gradually? Then you're going to give the SD or the instruction or cue that you want them to respond to. You're going to provide that prompt or support, and you're going to reinforce them for being successful, for following your instructions, even with your support. Then every time that you practice it, you're going to use your fading strategy, right? So maybe you do it 5 times with your support, and on the 6th time, you don't. That would be a mini prompts followed by no prompt. Or maybe each trial you provide a little bit less of that physical help. And therefore, by the sixth trial, they are doing it independently. You're always going to reinforce those unprompted trials because that's what you want. You want your learner to be more independent. And then if they still need support, sometimes that's okay. You can still provide reinforcement, even if they need support, but maybe just not as big, or maybe not every time that they do it with your help, so that it becomes more valuable to do it by themselves than it does to do it with support. All right, some other general strategies to keep in mind, and we've touched upon visual prompting, but visual supports in general can be very helpful. These are going to be visual cues or prompts that you can leave in the environment, or the learner can have them themselves. It could be things like pictures, it could be a checklist. Maybe it's a visual. For one learner, we had stop signs by the back door, which was just a cue to remind him that he needed to stop and ask first before he went outside, so that the family knew where he was. You need to make sure that if you're using a picture, your learner understands the picture. If you're using words, that your learner understands the words on the checklist. And you want to practice using those visual supports by helping them with the task and showing them where that is on the visual, right? So if I wanted to have a visual for brushing my teeth for my learner, I might have pictures of the toothbrush, and I might say, okay, get your toothbrush, and I point to the picture of the toothbrush. Okay, get your toothpaste, and I point to the picture of the toothpaste. And then now there's a picture of toothpaste on the toothbrush. Okay, let's put it on. Okay, now we brush. Here's your top teeth. Here's your bottom teeth. Okay, now we spit and we rinse, and I have pictures that represent those things, and I'm pointing to the pictures as I'm helping them through. As I begin to fade out my help, maybe I stop saying it, but I still point to the pictures. And then eventually I can stop pointing to the pictures, and they're either pointing to the pictures themselves, or they're looking at the picture to remind them of the next step. And at that point, then I can leave the visual up, and I can step out of the bathroom, and my learner can be independent with brushing their teeth, because they have this nice visual support that stays up. Now, sometimes people think, oh, well, the visual supports, might be kind of stigmatizing if you've got pictures of things around. And that's where, technology can be super helpful. So if you have a learner who's very conscientious about how other people might interpret some of those visuals, put it on their phone, right? My calendar is my to-do list. My email inbox is my to-do list, so that I know what I need to do each day. That's a visual support. I write out to-do lists. Maybe on my phone, I also have some reminders about maybe if I needed help with problem solving strategies, or if I'm feeling anxious, what do I do to calm myself down? Those could be things that are on my phone, or maybe they're on a card in my pocket that I can just take out and look and then put it away, but then I have that visual available, right? So it doesn't have to be, large print, little kid pictures all over, but just anything that might help cue the learner that you can keep in, that they can look at. That's going to help them become more independent and allow them to, again, be more successful when people who might have previously supported them are not able to support them in a particular task. Especially as our learners grow and want more independence and privacy, having some visuals, having some checklists, having some things to help them be more independent so that we don't have to monitor them, all the time can feel very rewarding for them as well. All right, and then just again, some general strategies when things start to go awry, or somebody is stressed, they're having a hard time. These are very general strategies. Obviously, if you have a more specific behavior plan in place that's working, do that. But in general, if somebody starts to get stressed, use fewer words and maybe more signals or visuals, right? Maybe some gestures, maybe pictures, maybe written explanations or expectations can help your learner understand what's going on and what you need from them. I worked with a learner who had a really rough morning, and when they arrived at school in mom's car, they were kicking and hitting, they were banging on the windows, like they were very, very frustrated. And, mom was concerned. The learner didn't want to get out of the car to go into the school. And instead of trying to talk the learner through calming down or anything like that, we got a whiteboard and we wrote, first, go inside, second, or then, play with, and he had like a calming box. I can't remember what we called the box, but then play with calming box, right? And we just held it up from the outside of the car by his window and just let him see that, and then gave him some space, and he was able to process that, and he was able to then make the decision to go inside and go get his calm down box. And then we could give him a lot more time to calm down in there, but he was in a safer environment because he wasn't out in the car, he wasn't out in the parking lot, and he had something to do to kind of get him focused on calming down. So, fewer words, more visuals can be very helpful to a lot of people. Telling your learner to calm down is probably not going to be very helpful, but maybe showing them some pictures or showing them some things that help them calm down might be. Also, pick your battles. Not every moment has to be a learning opportunity. And that's okay. You don't have to teach everything all the time. And sometimes we can let our learners, sort of get away with it, right? You know what? Yes, I know my learners should be working on this, but I'm not in a space to teach them right now, or I don't have the prompts in place or the supports in place to help them be successful. So I'm not going to worry about it. And we're just going to do our workaround instead. And that's okay. You don't have to make every moment a learning opportunity. Also, if you know that things are about to change, if something's changing, the routine is changing, or there's something coming up, giving as much notice and explanation about what is going on can be helpful. So even giving reasons, even if you're not sure that your learner completely understands the reason, trying to provide that information and convey that information can be helpful, because some of our learners actually are understanding a lot more of what's going on and what's being said than they're able to necessarily express back. And therefore, telling them, oh, the ice cream store is closed today, so we're not going to be able to get ice cream from the store we normally go to. However, we can go to this other thing instead, right? Or we can have the cake that we have at home or something, right? Explaining why instead of just saying, no, we can't. Even if you're not sure that they're completely following all of those reasons, you're making an attempt, and by explaining and exposing them to more of that language over time, maybe they will understand some of those reasons in the future. All right, so that is the end. And if you have any questions, you can email me at that address.